It is 3 minutes after 10, and the biggest story in town on this side of the Atlantic has suddenly become the arrest of Nicola Sturgeon's husband. I don't currently have anything to add to what Gina Davidson just shared with you during that news bulletin, but if anything does emerge or transpire, then rest assured we will bring that straight to you, toot sweet. Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Morel, understood to have been arrested in connection with an investigation into the funding and finances of the SNP. There's a whole heap of reasons why I don't have anything to add to that, including my ignorance of the nuances and differences between Scottish and English law. But I'm confident that we have gone as far, that we have not gone any further than we are permitted to go. But rest assured, I'll be bringing you more on that as and when it happens. The reason I mention the Atlantic, of course, is because former President Trump found himself arrested on 34 counts yesterday, and things I would suggest are looking rather more serious for him than some suggested. Not that that will stop the usual suspects from claiming that somehow the rule of law or the basic requirements of justice should somehow be trumped, if you pardon the pun, by status or fear of bolstering the base. He could still end up president again, but it doesn't change the fact that he's a despicable human being. That's the point about despicable human beings. History has taught us that they can end up in charge. God knows, it's not that long ago, Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister of this country. This idea that, oh dear, if you start actually obeying laws and holding people to account, then these despicable people, their despicable supporters, may end up actually supporting them even more loudly than they do already. So you should just be quiet and let them carry on being despicable and even possibly illegal. It's a very odd position, but I do understand it. Victor in Wandsworth, if you're listening, thank you. You inspired may be too strong a word, but you certainly caught my ear yesterday when you began the phone-in, brilliant phone-in about water quality yesterday. The more one looks at Therese Coffey, the more one wonders whether she has any appetite at all for, well, anything really, except perhaps turnips. But the clearly difficult and big job of getting a proper grip on the state of our waterways. St. Fergal of Sharkey in the Times today offering up an account of what he feels a government should do. I don't hold out much hope that it will be her. But Victor talked, as a lifelong Conservative voter, I always find a little bit of history very helpful when we're discussing modern politics because, well, as a very wise man once wrote, there's no point having a mind if you never change it. So I ask a question and I can predict your answer because I know your voting history. It's not a very interesting conversation. But if you arrive at conclusions that are open-minded, then you will be untribal. You will be less tribal, perhaps, than somebody who bases their what passes for their politics on oppositionism. Oh, I hate woke. You see it on Twitter, don't you? People whose profiles just tells you what they hate. I hate lefties. I couldn't possibly tell you what I mean by that, except perhaps people who aren't racist. I hate woke. I couldn't possibly tell you what I mean by that, except perhaps people who aren't racist. I hate liberals. I couldn't possibly tell you what I mean by that, except perhaps people who aren't racist. It's just so boring. So I am, in about 4 minutes' time, going to ask you, don't call in and be mad, as in crazy. I don't want crazy calls today because I'm asking a risky question and it's all Victor in Wandsworth's fault. Because Victor yesterday was adamant, rather beautifully adamant, that he cared more about the state of the waterways than he did about anything else. And I can see why. I tried in my clumsy way to marry politics and nature at this time yesterday morning to talk about my own later in life communing with the natural world, becoming passionate about things I once used to be very blasé, even ambivalent or bored by. Loving the interaction of human with the natural world, whether it's bird watching or waterways or flora and fauna, whatever it is. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen an owl, for example, in full flight. I'm such an urban boy. I grew up in the countryside, but I was too busy playing video games on my ZX Spectrum to notice all of the wildlife around me. Looking back, it's such a missed opportunity. But the point I was trying to make yesterday was that there is something almost... what's the word I'm looking for to describe something that's utterly intrinsic to existence? Something so basic in the good way, not in the way that the kids say it. Something so fundamental to, I think that might be the best word to use, fundamental to our existence, the cleanliness of water. You know, we see adverts, don't we, about people on this planet who still have to walk 10 miles to get clean water. They have to do it every day to get clean water. The fundamental necessity of clean water to civilized existence is something that really would be very near the top of the list of things that we have taken for granted for all of our lives. Wouldn't you? We must be. I mean, water. And some of the calls we took yesterday were terrifying in the sense of how bad the situation has become. And if you don't find the prospect of filthy water, every river in England being polluted, and questions now being asked about the safety of our actual drinking water, our tap water, I hope that they're unnecessary questions, but given that the only person who can answer them at the moment is Therese Coffey, I'd suggest that's not an ideal scenario. She's probably, 6 months away from saying, well, if you're worried about drinking tap water, why don't you just try turnip juice? That'll do the job perfectly. And it reminded me that people care passionately about things that are not on the front pages necessarily of the Daily Mail every day. They care passionately about things that are not in Rishi Sunak's sweet little list of pledges. 5 pledges from Rishi Sunak. The sun will come up tomorrow. Kidderminster Harriers will not win the FA Cup. Stop the boats. Halve inflation and butter your crumpets. It's so hard to remember what his 5 pledges are, but they don't come, I don't think, for all the focus grouping and the employment of shady foreign unelected bureaucrats to advise on wedge issues like immigration and transgenderism in the hope of distracting from the consequences of 13 years in power and enraging us instead with issues that are perhaps not at the top of our concern list. It just occurred to me that Victor knows what he cares most about. And what he cares most about, the single issue, if you like, is what he cares most about is water, sewage, rivers, seasides. And I kind of envied him. I don't think you can in this job have a single issue that you care most about. We've talked quite a lot about why I can't come on air every day, for example, and talk about the environment in general. But I'm also honest enough to tell you that I wouldn't really want to either, because I wouldn't find my work as interesting as I do if we talked about the same subject every day. We have to talk about lots of different subjects. I think if I probably had one thing that I could control, and it's a very odd thing to mention perhaps, it would be the stranglehold that right-wing media has on our country, has on the public. The way in which issues of race and class and deference are constantly both weaponized and ignored. If that sounds contradictory, it's because it probably is. But the rage that is harvested daily by precisely the people who benefit most from the status quo. We're so busy looking left and right to find people to get cross with that we constantly forget to look up. If I could, that's probably, in terms of political philosophy, that would probably be my most overarching concern, and you look at the consequences of it in America at the moment. You've got Donald Trump sitting in court, but of course Fox News, we now know, lied endlessly and egregiously about him and his ludicrous claims about winning the last election, up to and including the point where he pretty much inspired an armed insurrection against the elected government of his own country. So once you sell any semblance of decency or integrity or honesty, all bets are off. It can end up absolutely anywhere. Someone's texted me, Innate Keith, which I was about to say that's a rubbish nickname for him, but it's from Keith, and he means innate. As when I said fundamental, it's not from that Keith. I don't know if you... It means innate, water, the importance of water to it's innate. I prefer fundamental, actually, Keith, with respect. It's fundamental, intrinsic to and that's why Victor in Wandsworth cares more about the state of our waterways than anything else. I should probably have a little look, shouldn't I, at Rishi Sunak's little list. Let me just call it up for you. It's very important. His little list. Here it is. Halve inflation. That is pretty much gravity, albeit that it was expected to come down last month and didn't. The idea that it isn't going to halve in the next 12 months or so is one that you would struggle to find an economist supporting. So that's a little bit like me promising to have 1 million listeners this time next year. You know, unless something goes absolutely horribly wrong, it's a given. Grow the economy fits very much into the same category as you come off the back of COVID and coronavirus, as you suffer more from economic damage than pretty much any developed economy in the world. By definition, you're more likely to grow. Something that Boris Johnson was very good at. We've got the highest growth in the G8, he would say, without mentioning that the main reason for that was that we had lagged so far behind the rest of them that by simply running to catch up, we move faster than they do, even though they're all still ahead of us on where they actually are. Reduce debt, cut waiting lists, and stop the votes. Stop the votes. Great list. Not a lot there for me. Cut waiting lists would be great, but who wouldn't want to cut waiting lists? Who wouldn't pledge to do that? In terms of the thing that is most likely to influence your vote, you're going to be looking at things that have happened over the last 13 years that the Tories are responsible for. So weirdly, they're responsible, entirely and exclusively responsible for the epic backlog in asylum processing. But whether or not that is the single most important issue for you at the moment, I don't know, because they're telling you to care about the dinghies, to care about the desperate people coming over in the dinghies. But if that really is your top political priority at the moment, then your anger should be directed not at desperate people in danger of drowning, but at politicians who have cynically and deliberately decided to press pause on the asylum process so they can build up a massive backlog while closing down all safe and legal routes into the country to create a crisis that they then, using very well-rehearsed racist red meat tropes, use to enrage you to a point where you thank them for promising to fix it. It's the most disgusting kind of politics imaginable. Reduce debt. What difference does that make to you and I? I'd rather see teachers being paid more or nurses going to work with a bit of a spring in their step. I may be naive of me, but goodness me, reduce debt. Grow the economy. Well, for whose benefit? That's great. It's great. Yeah, grow the economy. Growth is great. But last time we had a Prime Minister telling us that growth is more important than anything else, she tanked the economy in 10 minutes straight. So these are meaningless words. Victor in Wandsworth's passion for the state of our waterways is worth 1 million Rishi Sunak little lists. So what's at the top of yours? A genuine question. This is where I say don't ring me and say mad stuff. All right. It has to be something that is both electorally pertinent, plausible, possible, something that a party could say, I really, really, really care about this, and something that really would be almost enough, perhaps not completely, almost enough to win you, regardless of how you voted in the past, regardless of what colour scarf you've spent your life, or indeed how tightly it's been tied around your neck. But in the way that Victor cares most about water, what for you is the issue you care most about? And I'll tell you why I'm asking you this question today. 52% because of Victor's contribution yesterday, but 48% because they're telling us now. Whenever I see the phrase silent majority, I always sigh a bit inwardly or roll my eyes. You do this for a living. There's no such thing as a silent majority, is there? It's like, the right-wing media that has pretty much a free hand in every corner of this country, except possibly the BBC. The right-wing voices are by far the loudest and by far the most common and by far the most frequently heard, constantly claiming they're the silent majority. I find it both hilarious and scary. A silent majority. We're the silent majority, says a bloke who's been on Question Time more times than David Dimbleby. We're the silent majority, says a columnist in the best-selling newspapers in the country. We're the silent majority, says some bloke who's been put in the House of Lords by Boris Johnson. We're the silent... I mean, what a load of old hokum. But people suck it up. And they are now telling us, largely the same people, are now telling us what we care most about. And at the moment, as far as I can tell, in the way that 30p Lee predicted or divulged or accidentally let the cat out of the proverbial bag, what they are telling you care most about at the moment are transgender toilets. And always remember, when you're listening to conversations about transgender toilets on LBC, there's one about 14 paces from this studio that we all use without any problems or complaints. Transgender toilets and refugees coming here in dinghies because the government has closed down any other method of genuine refugees getting to this country. That's what they are desperate to achieve, and it might work. It's not true at the moment. I can tell you, I see phone-ins about the transgender issue, which we may turn to a little later in the programme today for the first time in ages. The switchboard is very quiet, very, very quiet, but on people go with it. It's still banging away at that little drum, almost like Downing Street has issued instructions to Fleet Street. This must be a bigger story. This must be a bigger story. We've got to get it going. And then 30p Lee lets it slip in an interview that they've got nothing to fight the next election on, so they're probably going to go for transgender and culture wars. So it's refugees in boats and transgender. I don't believe that anybody intelligent or honest or decent truly considers that to be, or those to be, the single most important issue facing the massive majority of people in this country. Not during a cost of living crisis, not during an energy crisis, not during a period where social care is falling to pieces, the NHS is on its knees and job vacancies have reached record levels. What do you really care about? What do you really care about? Oh, refugees in boats and transgender toilets. Nonsense. That's what they want you to care about. It's not what you do care about. They send in their stormtroopers to try to control the national conversation, to try to manipulate consent, to try to deliver some sort of democratic boost from promising to fix problems they've created, while most people reporting on them don't mention the fact that the Tories are single-handedly responsible for every single problem that this country is currently addressing. So what do you care most about? 0345 6060 973. I can't stop you from being boring, right? And that's good. Some of your answers might be boring. And if I sound a little impatient, then please feel free to remind me of my manners. Because if your top priority is outwardly a little bit boring, that doesn't mean it's not important, relevant, or indeed crucial, and more importantly, sincere. But please, try not to be mad. 0345 6060 973. It is 23 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I suppose we should give Rishi Sunak credit. He has already delivered on one of his 5 pledges. When he promised to stop the boats, I don't know if he meant the boats carrying British school children to the continent for their Easter holiday school trips, but he's done a pretty good job of stopping them, so credit where it's due. But is it really one of the things that you care most about? Let's kick off with Rob, who's in Churnside on the Scottish borders. Rob, what do you care most about? And don't be bonkers.
I'm not going to be bonkers, but I'm probably going to be boring, so it's the only way is up from here.
Yes, carry on.
Because it's proportional representation, James, that I feel is the most important thing to me.
Yes.
Because I believe that the way that our politics and thus all these other issues you've discussed over the many, many years are based on adversarial and confrontational politics, where someone takes a position and then someone takes an anti-position, as you mentioned earlier, whereas at least in one part of the UK, we do have some sort of, if you like, agreement politics here. So the Greens are in power.
Or at least compromise and cooperation politics, if not full agreement.
Exactly. So, for instance, on the water argument, how many people in England really know that the only part of the United Kingdom, I think, other than Northern Ireland and Scotland, is that we don't have a private water company, and thus we don't seem to have lots of leaks and lots of... I'm sure we have leaks, but we don't have loads of effluent in our
and David
seas.
Attenborough was pretty clear. It's every river in England that is polluted.
Yes, he was, indeed. And I just think that until we sort out the voting system, which would then allow people, specifically in England, but the UK in wider elections, to feel that their vote matters and that their views that you're asking for today on their individual things may have more credence, more importance, it's going to be very difficult for the UK stroke England to be able to change the direction on many of the things that people are most, up in arms about.
In fact, I mean, I don't think this is boring, for what it's worth, for the very simple reason that whatever else follows is almost certainly going to be more likely or easier to achieve if your wish has come true first. So whatever anybody else rings in with, in a proportional representation parliament, it is probably easier to deliver or more likely to be delivered if it's for the general good than it would be, as you say, in an adversarial parliament where you can have, Home Secretaries essentially building entire government platforms on a promise to deport refugees to a country where there's a history of refugees being shot. I mean, that just couldn't, I don't think that couldn't happen. You could have that person in Parliament, but they couldn't be at the pinnacle of the political pyramid for very long.
Well, that's absolutely the case. I mean, and what's gone on, and obviously because of our geography in Scotland, we're not directly affected by, in inverted commas, small boats. However, we have an opinion up here where we can't understand why there's such a hue and cry, even to the extent of the numbers. I mean, I believe that 3 million people got visas to come into the whole of the British Isles last year quite successfully. And yet we're talking about figures of 40 and 50, 60,000.
But they've been, I mean, this is where the language of I mean, not even so much 1930s Germany as 1930s England, when the Daily Mail was talking about alien Jews, European Jews flooding into this country and boasting about how passionately they'd campaigned to stop it from happening. You portray people coming in as being criminal or evil or wrong, and then, of course, the number 40,000 or 10,000 or even 100 becomes pertinent. And I can tell you from the state of my inbox, there are plenty of people out there who believe everybody coming here in a dinghy, regardless of all of the well-documented stories of people becoming doctors or superb contributors to Britain and British society. That's what the right-wing media does. And what's changed in the last few years is that very, very senior right-wing politicians in Parliament and government, as opposed to people who couldn't defeat sharks in by-elections, have started joining in. So I'll put that on my list, actually. I'll put PR. I wonder if it's going to end up at the top of that list. 10:28 is the time. I'm going to squeeze in Dawn in Sawbridgeworth. I don't have long, Dawn, but I like to get a couple of calls on before the news when I can. What's your number one priority?
Yes, good morning, James.
Hello, Dawn.
Yeah, hello. My number one priority is the cost of living crisis. I can't see what the government is doing to help people with the cost of living crisis. I know that they're giving people on lower incomes payments towards electric and things like that, but it's just not enough. With the council taxes going up 5% in April, people are struggling to pay their rent, pay their mortgages, feed themselves. It really is. We are really in a crisis, and I can't see what help we're getting.
And it's set to get worse. So when a politician promises to halve inflation or grow the economy, I think he's addressing the issue that you describe. I think they are. Does it feel to you like they are?
Definitely not.
No.
People need help now. People, rents have gone up, I think, 20% in the last 5 years. And, mortgages are going up with inflation. And the cost of food is just out, through the roof. And
that's not none of these pledges are touching the sides of that issue. So you need wage increases, you need help, you need better, but possibly
we need a freeze on the
stronger welfare state, a little bit, maybe windfall taxes, because I'll tell you who's not struggling, that's the energy companies. They just seem to be dancing in the moonlight when it comes to the amount of money they take. And possibly it's worth pointing out that Suella Braverman has claimed £25,000 for energy bills for a house she doesn't use, while it's reported today that an 87-year-old woman in Bury, Greater Manchester, has died from hypothermia in her home because she was worried about the cost of heating, Dawn.
Exactly. It really is true that people are choosing between heat and heating, without a doubt.
And we don't hear enough about it. We don't read about it. We don't hear about it.
That's exactly it.
And that's why you're here today. So I warned you wouldn't have long, but you brought it in bang on time, for which I thank you. The time is 10:30. Thomas Watts is here now with your headline. It is 10:34. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The single most important issue for you that could tip an election, if you like, that could swing a pendulum, a political pendulum, so profoundly that it would make historic change. PR, I think, proportional representation is a no-brainer. I just unlikely to happen because the two main parties both benefit from the first past the post system when they win. That's a sort of, what's the word? Is that conundrum? Is that the word? A riddle? I don't know. And then, thanks to Dawn in Sawbridgeworth, the cost of living, it is bizarre, isn't it? It's a mark of first world problems, if you like, when we talk about this and that matters. But, there are millions of people in this country who are, for the first time in their lives, worrying about making ends meet. In some cases for reasons that are permanent, in others for reasons that are hopefully temporary. And the government and the opposition seem to ignore them a lot of the time. Maybe because it's not something you can easily translate into political heft, into front pages. You know, it's a bit like Rishi Sunak's little list, isn't it? Halve inflation and grow the economy. He might as well have written solve the cost of living crisis. It's all a little bit nebulous. 10:35 is the time. Dale's in Fleet. Dale, what would you like to put on my list?
Oh yeah, James.
Hello,
first-time caller,
Welcome.
but not a first-time listener.
Glad to hear it.
You mentioned moments ago about the one issue that you talked about being the right-wing media, and that's actually linked to the issue that I have is with my son's education.
Oh, yes.
The issue that I have is, intrinsically, he has a good family, and unfortunately, there's a lot of Daily Mail readers amongst the family, including nans, granddads, uncles, my dad. And the thing is, they're still going to vote Conservative, or, well, at least a few of them are, from my discussions with them. But the problem that I have is, the biggest issue for me is my son's education. He suffers with ADHD and with dyslexia, so he needs quite in-depth management, both from the teachers and from the supply teachers. And he gets funding from county. And
the teaching assistants, crucially, isn't it? The special educational needs assistants who probably aren't there anymore.
This is it. I mean, the thing is, not only are they not there, but it's actually access to other resources that are critical to his development and his learning in a neurodiverse capacity. It's so dispiriting. We've had countless meetings with them about the budget, and we did manage to get some money from county. But the teacher said it won't,
touch the
not
sides.
in so many words. Exactly, yeah.
And of course, you are, with respect, you're a squeaky wheel. You're a parent who, as you acknowledged at the very beginning, is across this and on top of it and doing your best for your boy. There'll be other lads with dyslexia and ADHD who sadly don't have mum and dad going into bat for them with the council or with the ECHP, EHCP, and that is also a consequence of politics.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. And I mean, what I don't get is, I mean, he's got a really loving family, really supportive, but their political choices make such a big difference to his education. Yeah. Because...
Well, how do you make sense of it then? How do you... I mean, I mean, this is why you do the demonization of the other, whether it is, quotes, a lefty or a refugee. They just think that the people calling for more funding in schools, it would involve higher taxes probably, not necessarily for the individuals that you're talking about, but for big companies, for the kind of outfits that make big donations to the Tory party. I mean, what is their reason for not wanting agents of change to be in power?
I think they're so far ingrained, so far involved with the actual... with the Daily Mail in particular in this point, that seems to be the paper that's actually pushing. Yeah,
it's the Fox News of the UK. I don't think it's insidious influence on public discourse, and indeed families can be exaggerated in any way.
No, with a fresh copy of the Daily Mail on, the breakfast table each morning, this kind of, tripe has been fed out. Across the country.
Teachers don't need any more money. Teachers don't need any help. They're all taking the mickey anyway. They're probably not even looking. So teachers become an enemy of your family, even though that is the only hope your boy has for the education he deserves.
Yeah, I know. But the thing is, though, with swathes of the electorate having, people at school, family members, people who teach, I don't understand why this, why it's just not being railed against, because
it is being railed against, just not in many places. I think, Dale, is the point.
I just don't have the financial capacity for much more help that I can give him. It has to, from a parental perspective, I do all I can educationally, but in terms of the specifics and that
it's a safety net.
Learning.
Yeah, I know. I'm with you, and it's a bleak issue that you raise. I think we would both agree it's not necessarily going to be a pendulum swinger, because it is something that is going to be particular to families like yours, albeit that there are thousands of families in the same position as you. The announcement that we're going to help someone that isn't you is not one that works politically in the media environment created by precisely the sort of newspapers that you refer to. In fact, promises to help someone that isn't you are grist to the mill of their hatred mongering. They're helping those people over there. They're helping those people over there, whether it's refugees or nurses or children with special needs. Not that long ago, you could hear radio phone-ins denying the very existence of conditions like ADHD. To my shame, Dale, 20 years ago, I might have been presenting one of them, but there is no point having a mind if you never change it. The announcement that we're going to help someone that isn't you. I'm all right, Jack. It's almost the essence of modern conservatism or post, I don't know, Thatcher conservatism. 1040 is the time. It's on the list. I mean, funding in schools generally, funding for special needs in particular, that would win votes. It would win Dale's vote, but if you haven't got a family member in that situation, would it win yours? Teachers would welcome it. It would make their lives easier. But anyway, stop the boats. Hey. David's in Clapham. David, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller to you.
Welcome aboard.
So bear with me.
Starstruck, that'd be ridiculous. Go on.
So the issue that's most important to me is actually investment in nuclear fusion power.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. Yeah, go on. You explain yourself. You paused then because you were expecting me to either scoff or howl or accuse you of something. I would never do that, David. But explain a little further because it's a bit like the bedrock issue, isn't it, rather than the day-to-day life issue. Yeah.
So the reason why this is the most important issue to me is because I see a lot of issues that happen in the world and a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Fighting between people,
yes,
for lack of a better term, really comes down to energy. Because you've got food prices going up. Why? Because energy prices are going up.
So cheap energy, close to free energy would solve almost every problem, or at least be a part of the solution to almost any problem on the planet.
I mean, it won't solve problems with inherent to human nature, but it'll give us less to fight about.
I love it. I love what a beautiful way of putting it. A pragmatic approach to idealism, David. It's a lovely philosophy that you have. Aren't things going quite well in that field? I appreciate the wheels move slowly, and it's certainly not my area of expertise, but I'm pretty sure I read recently that there'd been a major breakthrough.
There have been major breakthroughs, but now I'm a dual national, so I'm American as well.
Okay.
And it always broke my heart a little bit when I read about the government reducing funding for the jet program I think it's a reactor they're building in France, I think.
Okay.
Where several nations are supposed to be putting money into it so that they can bring this reactor online for more experiments to actually make fusion power commercially viable. And both Britain and the US both reduced funding in that, and I found it a little upsetting.
Was that under Trump or was that more recently than that?
What do you think?
I honestly don't know. I don't want to. I mean, obviously, I think it was under Trump, but I have to at least ask the question rather than just say that must have been Trump, because then I'll get a text saying, James O'Boring is lying again, or something like that. So it was under Trump, was it?
It was.
Okay.
It was.
Because I was going to say, if we do crack it, it's unlikely to be post Brexit. At least it's unlikely to be British led. It might be British scientists that are leading it, but they won't be working in British universities necessarily, and it's less likely now, of course, that they'll be collaborating and cooperating with peers elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, there are experiments running in Britain, but the big one that they are trying to bring online in the next couple of decades, which I understand is a long time frame, but
not in the context of humanity, only in the context of you and me.
Wise men plant trees that they know they will never stand in the shade of.
That's a beautiful phrase, which I have heard before, but I haven't properly registered. And it actually unpicks one of my prejudices, because I normally talk about aristocrats planting trees, because they know that their great-grandson is going to be the one to enjoy the view coming up the avenue to the house. But in fact, of course, trees have a benefit for everybody, which is generally not aesthetic. It's the shade or the food or the fruit. David, thank you. A lovely call. It is, good grief, it's 11:15 already. How did that happen? It is 10:49, and it is not really the things that they want you to care about that concern us today. Rather, it is the things that you do care about. Rather obviously, the cost of living crisis, the state of our schools, proportional representation. So it's a slightly trickier issue, perhaps, than some of the analysis allows. Nuclear fusion makes the list. Weirdly, and it's early days, so there's plenty of time, no one's mentioned nitrous oxide canisters. I don't know whether that's just because I'm not getting the calls I deserve at the moment. Things that you really care about. Forget the cost of living crisis. Feel the nitrous oxide canisters. Gary's in Maidenhead. Gary, what is it for you?
I wanted to you, James. Can I just say, if you ever wanted to run for Prime Minister, you would definitely get my vote.
That's very kind of you. I mean, genuinely, that's very kind of you, Gary. But if only it were that easy, eh?
James, you're the sort of person where you need to run the country.
Thank you, mate. I appreciate that.
But from my point of view, I've been sleeping in my car since last August, so it's and housing is the two main things that we need. Something to be done about universal credit, because that basically what put me into the car. So
you couldn't keep a roof over your head on what the safety net that we all pay into provided you with when things went a bit shaky. Were you surprised by how fragile that grip on security was? Were you surprised by how quickly?
Oh God. I mean, I'm coming up to 62, and I did speak to Sheila last year when she done a thing about homelessness.
I remember that.
Yeah, and I'm still in the car. I mean, I've been told by the council, you ought to be glad you're in the car. There's people in the doorway. And I said, well, does that make it any better then?
No, of course it doesn't. And what?
I mean, go from $350 earning money a week, and you have to give up ill health, and the X-rays and everything prove it. I need a new knee, and I've got cancer in my other leg. And then you go from $350 a week to £148 a month. That's a month on universal credit, less than 40 quid a week. And I said to him, well, that's going to put me in. That's going to make me homeless. He says, well, there's nothing we can do about it.
If you don't get any help with rent or anything like that, or was that your personal circumstances at the time?
Yeah, it was because I got hit from in 2000 when we had the banking crisis. I was connected. I used to do a lot of maintenance for estate agents, and when a lot of them went on, it's a long story, but I basically lost my house. The bank took the house back.
Right.
Then I ended up on a mobile home in a farm, and then 3 years ago, the farm shut down. And because it was basically, I used to give money to help the farmer out. So
it was a bit off. It was a bit off the books, and you didn't have a paper record to. Well, you've slipped through the cracks, then, Gary. You've slipped through the cracks. Can I ask you a slightly weird question? Would you mind?
You go far ahead, buddy.
Why aren't you blaming foreigners for you sleeping in a car?
Well, I haven't gone down the route of drugs, and I haven't gone down the route of drink. Yeah. And you said about the canisters. That I see homeless people giving up because of the canisters. And they do blame the foreigners. Yeah. I don't blame the foreigners, but where it is unfair, even though they know my circumstances, and I am sort of like in with shelter and crisis, but because I need disability facilities,
yes.
But where I do get a bit chuffed off,
yes,
not with the foreigners, is the fact that they won't even put me in a hotel on the ground floor.
Yeah, that is a valid point. It's not their fault you're sleeping in a car, but it would be nice if you could have the same facilities, access to the same facilities and accommodation that other desperate people receive from the state when they're in desperate circumstances. I completely agree. I think I'd put you near the top of the list. I don't know what you were like before you fell on hard times. I don't know what your politics were.
My dad, he fought in the Second World War. He was in the second wave in Normandy.
Right.
He got shot twice, but he survived the war. And when he died, I was a young lad, but he always used to say to me, we fought for a better country, and things would be a lot better for you, especially as you get older. God. And it's all gone kaput.
Fit for
James, I really think the aliens have took over this Tory government. If somebody, honestly, I'm not joking, if somebody was to examine them, I reckon they're like robots.
It's reality, Gary. It's a let me finish. It's a question of what reality looks like through your window, both literally and metaphorically. So through your window, through the car window, reality is an absolute mess. It's insanely ridiculous that people swanning around in power. I will mention how rich Rishi Sunak is, because you're sleeping in your car, and it doesn't make any sense at all that you would be sleeping in your car while Suella Braverman is claiming 25 grand a year in energy bills for a house she doesn't live in. It just feels bonkers. But if you're looking through a different window, this is how it happens. I don't know if you need me to. I probably don't need me to explain this to you. But millions of people are looking through completely different windows, and they don't see what you see, or indeed what I see.
Well, I'll be honest with you. When I was, because I mean, when I was a young man in the 80s, and I sort of like with Margaret, I have voted Tory in the past.
Of course.
I feel, but the one thing I'm not. Because I can't see telly and stuff, I hear a lot on the radio, and I'm always... But I'm not getting the sort of things that I hear from... I mean, I'm sure Labour would do a better job, but if Labour was to come out and say our number one priority is to start building social housing and helping people... I mean, I understand why teachers and nurses, they all need more money, but like I say... And I'm not going to let the system break me. I'm not going to let them turn me into go down the route, like I say, of the other people that I see homeless.
I hear you.
I'll be honest with you. I know of a lady, and I've even seen the video. She can't afford eating electric. She's putting firelighters in a saucepan with the window open.
Good Lord.
To heat stuff up on the saucepan.
Well, there's an older lady in the news today who only gave up work at 82, and at 87 she died of hypothermia because she was frightened of turning on the heating, even though she could afford it. The family had, you get it in your head, don't you, that you can't do these things. I think you're right. I think actually, and you've done it both from the inside of your own experience and from the outside. You remind us that we take our eye off the important things. Homelessness is insane by any available measure, by any rational metric. In a country where people have several homes, or in a country where I can't remember how much the Prime Minister paid in order to upgrade the electricity grid for his new swimming pool, while Gary, who's worked all his life and whose dad died of injuries sustained in the Second World War, it is either relevant or not relevant. The fact is he's sleeping in a car in a country where the Prime Minister is paying hundreds of thousands of pounds to upgrade the electricity grid in his area to heat his swimming pool, while other people can't heat their homes. It is insane, right? And I don't know, what do you do? Reach for a misinterpretation of the Bible and claim that the poor will always be with us or something like that? Or do you just turn it off because you can't process the madness of it? Gary, you take care, mate. We'll talk again, I know we will. And I hope things get better for you. But what use is that? It's not going to butter any parsnips or indeed turnips, to bring Therese Coffey back into the conversation. I met someone yesterday. It's a helpful moment to mention this. I met someone yesterday who I can't remember being as inspired or as impressed by an individual as I was by a chap I interviewed yesterday, for full disclosure. He's called Jason Arday, and I knew it was going to be special, but it was special for completely different reasons from the ones that I expected to be. So I'll tell you now, right, that Jason couldn't speak until he was 11, and he couldn't read and write until he was 18, and he recently became the youngest ever black professor at Cambridge University. He's not even 40 yet. Makes you sick, doesn't it, that level of high achieving? So I suspected it would be one of those conversations about adversity and overcoming difficulty. Nothing like that at all. I'm not going to spoil the interview for you. It'll be on Full Disclosure in a couple of weeks. One of the single most impressive people I've ever had the privilege of meeting. But his formative years, when he couldn't speak, were spent watching and wondering. He didn't feel in any way cut off, actually, from society. He didn't feel in any way disadvantaged or disabled. He felt it was a great gift to have this ability to watch and learn, to observe people, to try to make sense of the world around him. It's why he's gone on to be such an effective academic. I think about the perfect preparation for a life in academia, particularly in sociology or the sociology of education. Just watch and watch and watch and watch and learn and learn and learn and learn. And even as a young man, he one of the first moments of engagement with society at large that he had was the mystery of homelessness. And to hear him talk about it yesterday was absolutely shattering in many ways, because you forget that you've got people like Gary sleeping in a car. It makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. And yet, what's on Rishi Sunak's list? Grow the economy, halve inflation, stop the boats, butter the crumpets, put lead in the pencils. I don't think Keir Starmer's list is necessarily much better. But what are the marks of a civilised society, if not to have wealth distributed in such a way that everybody has got a roof over their head? And the only way you do that is by significantly reducing, it'd still be the richest people in the country, but significantly reducing the wealth of people like the current Prime Minister. It is 3 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Stop all the clocks. We're going to talk about transgenderism, which we do very, very rarely on this programme for two reasons, one of which is selfish and one of which isn't. I generally upset everybody when we wade into this conversation. I'm regularly called transphobic, which is obviously hurtful and obviously untrue. But equally, I'm also called misogynistic by, I don't know if she actually used the word, but most recently a journalist I've always admired, Suzanne Moore, lumped me in with various people who are very, very prominently, I don't even know what the language is that one deploys in these circumstances, but are vocally, vociferously of the view that transgender women should be able to go wherever they want, even when it frightens or threatens biological women currently in those same spaces. So I upset everybody when I talk about this. It's a strange one. I once tweeted, for example, that it seems to me to be reasonable to exclude human beings with penises from female-only spaces, to which my friend Paris Lees replied, "You know me, we've met several times, I'm a transgender woman, do you know whether or not I've got a penis?" And I realised that even that relatively simple contribution to the conversation didn't really stand up to scrutiny. It was quite an enlightening moment. And that's the problem I've got, is that when you talk about stuff, usually you learn more. But on this issue more than any other, when we talk about it, we almost learn less. You're constantly encouraged to entrench. Now, the reason I also avoid it is because, as 30p Lee accidentally divulged in a recent interview, that the government is determined, in the absence of any actual achievements, it's determined to turn it into culture war red meat that will divide the population and create a problem that only they can solve. No matter that plenty of other countries have got legislation similar to what was about to be introduced in Scotland and don't report problems on anything like the scale that many people with legitimate concerns fear could or might happen. And then the prospect of somebody convicted of rape, claiming to be transgender, being put in a women's prison when almost everybody watching that is very sceptical about the claim, obviously creates an enormous problem. But when the Convention on Human Rights, I forget what the correct phrase is, I'll get it for you in a minute, but when the government asks the ECHR to look into an issue, and the ECHR or ECHR responds by suggesting that some problems could be solved by confining areas to biological women, i.e. women who were born women, rather than women who have transitioned to womanhood, it is time to talk about it. But how do we talk about it? Well, I think I know, or at least I think I've got one way to do it. It's the Equality and Human Rights Commission that is suggesting that some areas of legal opaqueness could be rendered clearer if laws were introduced to ban trans women from single-sex spaces and events. Now, that includes hospital wards and changing rooms. Hospital wards, almost everybody wants to be single-sex, but many of them still contain biological men and biological women. The trans equation doesn't come into that conversation. My mum was in one. I told you about it at the time. She hated it. It's horrible. So, I mean, how changing the law is suddenly going to solve the impacts of cuts to the NHS and austerity is for Kemi Badenoch to tell you. But I think the way I'm going to approach this subject is a little bit unexpected. So I don't know if you've heard people, it's a very lazy question. Can a woman have a penis? To which the response is usually, oh gosh, got obfuscation, or clearly not, oh don't be ridiculous, oh it's so well, oh it's horrible. Can you be born into the wrong body is the question that you ask. And I think the answer to that is obviously yes. It's been obvious for hundreds of years that you can be born into the wrong body. So when people say, can a woman have a penis? They're not really interested in approaching any sort of solution to this situation. They're just interested in bolstering the culture war. So if I were Keir Starmer or any other member of the body politic, and I were asked, can a woman have a penis? I would say I can't answer that question until you tell me who checks, because I'm a policymaker, right? I'm a politician. And my job is to support policies and ideas. My job is not to sit in philosophical pronouncement upon the nature of gender or the nature of sex. Plenty of other people can appoint themselves to that position, and they can argue with each other, and that's absolutely fine. But I am the Minister for Equalities, let's pretend. I am Kemi Badenoch. So my job is to introduce legislation that improves the situation, ideally for everybody, alternatively for somebody. She is of the view that she wants to improve the situation for what we will call biological women, right? She wants to improve the situation for biological women by banning everybody who was not born as a biological woman from these spaces, from these female-only spaces, right? But I'm a politician. I'm not a philosopher. I have to introduce legislation that will work. So who's going to check? That's the question I've got for you. How is it going to work? Who's going to check? Here's a door, right? Two people are trying to go through it. One looks incredibly feminine, for want of a better word, but is actually a transgender woman. And one, again, speaking entirely theoretically, one looks quite masculine, but is a biological woman. Who's going to check who can go through that door? Now, it may well be that lots of other people have arrived at this conundrum already and have got good answers to it. But I can't think of one at the moment. I genuinely can't think of one. And I think this is why people who don't like thinking, or people who don't like changing their minds, or people who don't like acknowledging the existence of nuance or grey areas or difficult issues, I think that's why they're obsessed with asking questions like, what's the definition of a woman, or can a woman have a penis? To which my response is, I don't know. In many ways, I don't know. Because when you ask me, can someone be born into the wrong body, then obviously that is true. And is it possible that our notions of gender may be revolutionised in the same way that our notions of sexuality have been over the last 50 years? I'd probably say, I think it is more than likely. More than likely. So I don't think it involves cowardice to say that nobody is wrong, but I can't call you a liar. You tell me you were born in the wrong body, I can't call you a liar, or rather I won't call you a liar. I have no desire to call you a liar. I don't want to call you a lie, a living, breathing, walking lie. The condition that you experience is dishonest, it's insincere, it doesn't actually exist. There are plenty of people who will tell you that. If you are transgender, they'll tell you you're a lie. You're a walking, living, breathing lie. You don't exist. We can pretend that some elements of what you're saying can be accommodated by society, but you fundamentally do not exist. You cannot be born in the wrong body. And on the other side, you tell me that you are threatened and frightened by the prospect of non-biological women having access to your spaces, your changing rooms, your hospital wards. I mean, that's obviously already happened, but we're speaking theoretically. Your sports events. Again, that's probably a slightly more nuanced issue than simple access to space. I'm not going to call you a liar. I'm not going to say you're not really scared. You're just desperate to discriminate against these people that you find weird, or these people that you find insincere, or these people that you find dishonest. I'm not going to. I'm certainly not going to call you a liar. And then you've got the areas where we probably mostly agree that it looks like some male rapists lie about being transgender in order to make a mockery of the judicial system and the prison system. I think that's probably one area where we can all agree. But then I'm calling someone a liar, you see. In the case of rapists with penises, I'm prepared to impose a slightly less rigorous ethical code than I am with you and with you and with you. for good or for ill. So the question is, who's going to check? 03456060973. If Cammie's Law comes in, two people, both, well, no, I was going to say both wearing frocks, which is a slightly 1970s approach to the issue, but they're not both wearing frocks. Two people, one wearing a frock in full makeup with a visible cleavage and tights on and high heels, a head-turning woman, until you find out more about her, is walking towards a single-sex space, is walking towards a female space. And then here is someone with, let's just say, for the sake of argument, a shaven head, wearing dungarees, apparently flat-chested, wearing flat shoes, bother boots. Who's going to check which one is a biological woman and which one isn't? That's it for me. It's taken me quite a long time to get here. But when I hear people say, can a woman have a penis? I feel uncomfortable, and I haven't been able to work out why. But the reason why I feel uncomfortable is that it's a really stupid question. It's a really stupid question because we're not talking about philosophical or physiological definitions. We're talking about shared experiences. We're talking about two people walking towards the same door, one of whom looks like a bloke and one of whom looks like a woman, according to my upbringing and background. But what I do know, and what no one can dispute, is that the human being who looks like a woman may have been born a man, and the human being who looks like a man may be a biological woman. So who is going to check? Are we going to have a little ID card? And a scanner? Is it going to be like getting on the bus, where you'll make 50 journeys and you won't have any trouble at all, but on the 51st journey, the inspector's going to get on and say, excuse me, madam. Can't really say, excuse me, madam, can you? Excuse me, madam, he'll say, or she'll say, could I possibly check your ID, please? Obviously, it's not going to happen on a bus, because we don't have different areas on it. But you're in the changing room. You're in the ladies. You go to the ladies 50 times, but on the 51st time, you've got to prove you're a lady. How? 03456060973. You can also give me a call and tell me why this is not a very important question for people actually coming up with laws designed to exclude non-biological women from single-sex spaces. Because at the moment, I can't see it. And of course, massive majority of people listening aren't going to ring in, but just do me one favour. Next time you hear someone say, can a woman have a penis? Just think about this question. Because until you tell me who's going to check, I don't see any point at all in asking the second question. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. It is 19 minutes after 11, and because this is such a minefield, for the avoidance of doubt, when I used the phrase biological woman previously, I was referring to women whose gender identity corresponds with the sex registered for them at birth, i.e. not transgender, but even biological women can be a hurtful phrase. And I'm not here for the philosophy, I'm here for the laws. I'm here to examine Kemi Badenoch's law. I'm pretending that I'm the Equalities Minister. And I'm contemplating a law that would ban transgender women from cisgender spaces. Who's going to check? Grace is in Cambridge. Can we call it the penis police, Grace, or would that be too simplistic?
Well, it would be quite ridiculous in fairness, I think. I'm a cis woman, just for clarity, and I'm pro-trans, I guess, if for want of a better word. I would have thought
you just
human rights.
Acknowledge the reality of it, really, is all you mean by that, I think, is it?
Yes. I mean, I actually believe that trans women are women and that they have the right to use the bathrooms that they've used forever. Okay.
But even if you believed that they didn't, or let us examine the thinking of people that don't believe that, a genuine question: how would it be checked? How would we police it?
Well, you can't, because, of course, there are other women who don't look particularly feminine. There are men who, don't look particularly masculine. Yes. Are we saying that everybody has to, go out and wear makeup? Are we saying that everybody has to really confidently show their gender identity.
I don't know. I mean, in many ways, it's not for you to answer, is it? Because you don't feel that that Kemi's law would be a good idea.
It shouldn't even be a question, frankly, because it's putting people in danger, James. Like, I know this is an uncomfortable topic for you, and it is for me as well. And you can probably tell I'm quite emotional about it because it's recycled homophobia, and it's actually putting trans people in danger. And I'm coming at this. I don't actually know. I don't have any real life, trans friends, but I can see it constantly, and it's growing, and obviously people are in danger, and I'm seeing it online, I'm seeing it in conversation, and when Kemi Badenoch comes up with something like this, it's a confected culture war.
It's designed to do what you describe. Are you coming across it anywhere, for want of a better phrase, in real life? Because you mentioned you don't have trans friends. Do you come across people who hold the views that Kemi Badenoch is appealing to with pronouncements and policy making like this? Because I generally don't, and I do this for a living. But I'll tell you now, I mean, my switchboard is ringing off the hook because I generally ask the right questions. But when I see or hear other people trying to whip up anti-trans feeling, it doesn't work at the moment. It just doesn't happen.
It's a small cult. That's the reality. But they've got the right people on their side, and these groups that have sprung up, like LGB Alliance, they're based at Tufton Street, just like all of the others. This is what this is actually coming down to.
On this occasion, you may not thank me for it. I'm going to steer away from that territory. Not because I'm fearful of it, but because I think that the focus on the question that I'm asking today is the point of this phone-in. Under Kemi's law, who would check?
It would be impossible to check. And
so how do you have a law then? What's the law for? What's the law for if it can't be in any way effectively?
It's to discriminate. It's pure and simple. It's to discriminate against trans women because they're not even looking at trans men. It's not even to discriminate.
It's to discriminate against trans women who don't look as similar to cis women as other trans women, because trans women who I always refer back to Paris Lees because I know her and I know she's comfortable with me doing this.
Fab, yeah.
And no one's going to stop her in a lobby to turn left for the ladies, turn right for the gents. No one's going to stop her.
But why should she feel as though she would be stopped? Because she's known, just like lots of other amazing trans women who are, writing and speaking. There are other trans women who are gender, can pass, they call it, as women, who receive abuse constantly from their families, from, they're discriminated.
But oddly, not from strangers, because strangers don't know that they're trans. It's only going to come from people that they know. Grace, thank you. It's a good faith question, this. But I don't think anyone should be required to answer any of the other questions about possessions of penis or about biology until they answer this question. How's it going to be introduced? How's Kemi's law going to work? Who's going to check? Who is going to staff the penis police? Lucy's in Forest Hill. Lucy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I'm a trans woman, and first thing I'd like to say is thank you for actually, having this question. Like, there's been so much discussion over the past, since the Tory leadership election, about us, but almost never with us.
Yes, I can see that. I mean, I haven't done much on this issue for the reasons that I outlined in my introduction, but I'm trying today, to come up with something that would be workable in the context of what Kemi Badenoch appears to think that people want. So can you help? Can you tell me who'd check? Who'd check you? Who would check you?
The problem is, as you said, it's unworkable. Are you going to have genital inspectors in front of every toilet? Or if we're not going with that, do we start producing ID whenever we need to go to the toilet? As your previous caller said...
that would work. But it would be ID that proves that you're cis, because you couldn't have a gender recognition certificate. That would be excluded, as I understand it, under what Kemi Badenoch is considering. So anybody. So and who decides? I mean, who decides who's suspicious?
Exactly. Quite often, you see this online. Often, you hear of gender non-conforming cis women.
Yes.
getting attacked, getting abused in female toilets because they don't look woman enough. Like, this is just reinforcing, like, gender roles, which is the whole point of feminism, has been to get away from these things. But also there's the other side. If you put laws in place that say based on biological sex, that means you're going to have trans men who are under whatever unworkable definition they come up with, biologically female, who have beards, muscles, years of testosterone.
They'll have to go to the ladies.
Exactly. The exact sort of people that, you know, all these gender criticals are saying we don't want in our toilets. So
I don't know. Are they saying, no, I
but
don't want anyone to put any words in other people's mouths. So the people you describe as gender critical, perhaps they'd be comfortable with bearded trans men in their toilets. I don't know. I haven't heard them say we wouldn't want that.
But if you think about, like, all the claims of, you know, the worries and the fears, you know, of males, like, these are exactly the sort of people who will then be attacked for being in the toilet that laws been put in to tell them to go to.
Yeah, I mean, as it stands at 28 minutes past 11, I cannot see how anybody can be having the conversations that are being had in the British media and in British Parliament and in the Department for Women and Equalities until they answer this question.
And of course, there's a bigger question of on what basis are we defining biological sex? Because the more you try and
is it anatomy? Is it hormones? Is it cells? Is it chromosomes? I mean, I know that people generally reach, for want of a better phrase, Lucy, they generally reach for the penis at this point, don't they?
The problem is, so if someone's had sexual reassignment surgery, well, they won't have a penis, so they're going to push that further back. And the problem is, when you try and delineate into clear one or the other...
How do you check that then? How do you check this? If someone's had surgery, what was the inspection going to involve?
DNA testing.
And of course, the point to remember, if anyone's missing it, and I doubt anybody listening to this is, but everyone has to be checked. Not just trans women have to prove, but everyone has to be checked. So every cis woman has to prove that they're not trans in order to get into that female-only space, as I understand it. Otherwise, what's the law going to do?
Exactly. Like, transphobia almost always ends up hurting cis women as much as it does end up hurting trans women because of all these things. Like, what is a woman becomes, well, what gender roles are you performing? How feminine do you look? Are you fitting the stereotype? Or it ends up into ridiculous, over-the-top biological essentialism that cannot work. Because even if you go to chromosomes, even if you go to DNA, well, what happens to intersex people? Because there isn't a pure, clear line. I'll split everyone into one or the other of the two groups. There's always some crossover and grey area. They're intersex people. Where are they going to go to the toilet?
I don't know. I mean, this is why I'm going to be strict-ish on focusing this conversation entirely on the question that I'm asking. Because if, Kemi Badenoch, I was a lawmaker or a politician, then it is not for me to sit in judgment on either science or philosophy. It is simply for me to create a scenario in which this law I want to introduce could be enacted. And the law she wants to introduce is a ban upon transgender women accessing what she would call female-only spaces. And I want to know how it would work. And until you can tell me how it would work, it seems to me utterly pointless and indeed dangerous, often deliberately dangerous, to ask questions like, can a woman have a penis? I could be wrong, and the phone lines are open if you want to show me why I am. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 11:34 is the time. I don't know if this is helpful for you, but it seems to me that when we're exploring territory that involves quite a lot of trust and confidence on your part, then the least I can do is crave your trust and confidence. The first time I waded into this issue, I think, was shortly after I'd been shopping with one of my daughters. And it was policy in the shop that we went to that I can accompany her into a cubicle and help her try on clothes. So far, so unremarkable. And then by coincidence, a story popped up in the news that week about I think, same-sex changing rooms. And I approached it from a very casual point of view. Well, hang on a minute, I was with my daughter at the weekend and there's no problem at all there. And I was thinking, and then it all went a bit weird, and things still pop up on the internet. So someone rang in and was very well versed in the transgender debate, very transgender rhetoric, and ended up putting a transcript of our conversation online where it contained descriptions of what I really meant when I said what I said. Now, if you've listened to this program before, I don't generally have a problem saying what I really mean. But in these kind of conversations, everybody is so determined to demonize any dissent or even query or question that you know that's not what he meant at all. He meant this, that, or the other. And so it kind of scared me off the subject, which may well have been the point. But I was actually thinking the other day that if it had been 10 years later, and I had been waiting outside the changing room when my daughter went in to the changing room, if it had any form of communal area, and I am not au fait particularly with the changing facilities in I know that John Lewis has cubicles and then a communal area in the middle. The last one I went to did anyway. But I could perhaps have felt that man shouldn't be going into that space with his younger daughter. I could just about. I'm always trying to imagine the other side or a different art, because otherwise you turn into. Well, let's not mention any names, but you could have a column in the Daily Mail by tea time, and it was just sort of timing, really. That idea that my position was born of a very casual and largely irrelevant recent experience of accompanying my daughter with permission and obviously and checking that this was fine into a changing room so that I could basically help her. She was very young at the time, and then I can imagine having a feeling. So my introduction to this subject was absolutely pointless, to be fair. Utterly nothing to do with the conversation that has been raging now for a few years, and which Kemi Badenoch is clearly determined gets even more unpleasant and even more angry, which I can't stop her from doing that. And this platform, this little radio show is not enough to stop the tidal wave of bigotry and unpleasantness coming out of Rishi Sunak's government at the moment. But we have to keep trying. You have to keep trying. And on this issue, the question becomes, how does the law work? How does Kemi's law work? You are excluding transgender women from women's spaces. How? 0345 6060 973. And if you can't answer that, don't get cross with me. I can't stop you getting cross with me. Get cross with the people that have encouraged you to have thoughts and conversations about this issue without asking you this question. Because I don't know whether it's deliberate or not. But surely, and do you know, oddly, do you want to know when the penny dropped? Penny dropped when I read this story this morning, and it talked about hospital wards. Because successive Tory governments have done absolutely nothing to stop mixed wards. They've made noises about it, they've made promises about it, but they've done absolutely nothing to stop mixed wards, which is men and women, often in even adjacent beds. It happened to my mum. That's how I know about it. And it seems to me to be cynical to the point of obnoxiousness that they'll do absolutely nothing about men and women being compelled by cuts and austerity and Conservative Party policy to share wards. But when you put it through the mangle of the transgender conversation, suddenly it becomes so important we're going to have to make a law about it. Because to the best of my knowledge, the problem in hospitals for women has not been the presence of trans women in the same ward. It's been the presence of big, hairy men. Weird. That's when the penny dropped. I said, this isn't actually about policy. This is entirely about provocation. It's got nothing to do with making things work, and it's got everything to do with making people frightened and angry. I could be wrong. The phone lines are open. Sarah's in Hounslow. How would it work, Sarah?
Hi, James. The answer is that it won't.
It can't. It can't. I'm going 11:39. I'm going to can't. I'm moving from won't to can't, but I could be wrong. Yeah. I could be wrong.
It can't, and they know this. This is all about othering a tiny and very, very vulnerable minority. My daughter is transgender, and she came out, when she was about 7, she started trying to harm herself, and she attempted suicide many, many times from an extremely young age, which, as you can imagine, is quite frightening.
Yes.
And we could never really work out what was going on. And then when she was 16, she came out to me, and I was flabbergasted.
Right.
But since then, it's like the sun has come out in her life. She doesn't feel afraid to be the person she is. We've had no more suicide attempts. Her depression has lifted. She is like a different person. But she is afraid when she goes out in public because she is worried about the way that people will respond if she tries to go to the toilet, if she tries to try on some clothes in a shop. And the trouble is that people like the government at the moment are stoking this hatred, and it is making, transgender people genuinely afraid. But, there is already a suicide rate an attempted suicide rate, of between around 35% to 50% of transgender people.
I'll have to take your word for that. I haven't got the statistics in front of me, but the experience seems traumatic, doesn't it? Of thinking, never mind realizing that you are in a body that you don't want to be in, and caveats and cul-de-sacs and adjuncts to that statement, obviously, and there are examples of people changing their minds later. Not many, of course, but they tend to get a heck of a lot of coverage. But that idea that this would be done through casual choice when the life-changing consequences are epic. Your daughter would much rather deal with the problems that she encounters as a transgender woman than she did as someone living a lie in her own heart, mind, and soul.
She said to me, "Why would you put yourself through this? Why would you do that? Why would you go through all this hatred and vitriol, in the public, if it wasn't really important?"
Well, I had the same conversation about homosexuality when I started in this job, when people talked about it as a lifestyle choice. And I would say, why would anyone choose to be gay in a world where you exist? You've got some rabid homophobe calling for them to be strung up from the nearest lamppost or condemned to the eternal fires of hell. And you'd say, if it's just a choice, why would anyone choose to be that way in a world where you exist? And it's a similar, I hear an echo of that observation when you speak, when you tell me your daughter's story.
Yeah, they're saying that, it's such a problem. Well, since the Gender Recognition Act came in 2004, there has been 4,000 people apply for a gender recognition certificate.
Yeah.
So it is a tiny number of people. And this is what I'm saying. It is a othering of an extremely vulnerable, tiny minority.
And, I'm not getting much representation of what we'd have to call the other side on the programme at the moment, but perhaps that's because they would agree that there is no answer to this question. They're just not as comfortable stating it publicly as you are. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. How would it work? How would it work? Because you would have to prove that you are cis in order to exclude your daughter from the facilities that you can use.
Precisely. And, your previous callers made a really good point about transgender men. And transgender men almost always look much more masculine.
Yes.
And, I've seen, videos on Twitter and so on where transgender men have gone and used female facilities, and there's been, a massive hoo-ha.
Yes, of course there would. And it would have to cut both ways for it to work, wouldn't it? Again, how would that be? I don't think we need to move on to that bit of it. That would be Kemi's second law. The second law of Badenoch would be that transgender men have to use the ladies' facilities. And how the heck is that going to be introduced? Who's going to sell that to the population? But that's not. I don't need to go there today. This question has got more than enough relevance and quite a lot of people responding to this with very powerful text and tweets, for which I'm hugely grateful, because I do take these subjects very seriously. I do think about them a lot, even when I'm not talking about them. I can't expect everybody to have read my books, particularly my last book on this subject, to explain my issues and my difficulties. But a lot of you feel today, like me, that we have finally got to a place where an issue that appeared utterly intractable and utterly immovable has moved. It might not have moved in the direction that you want it to move, but until you tell me how this law works, there's absolutely no point whatsoever having conversations about the definition of a woman or the pertinence of a penis. That sounds like a Jane Austen novel, doesn't it? After Pride and Prejudice, the unpublished classic, Jane Austen's Pertinence of a Penis. 11:49 is the time. I do have to guard against introducing my middle-aged descent too much into the programme. I was tempted to ask, is it time to mow the lawn yet? I think it is if it's dry enough. Yeah, just not too short. First mow of the season. Maybe a little bit of food and seed. I don't know, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Kemi's law that would ban transgender women from women's spaces. And I just wonder how she thinks it would work. It's 10 to 12 now, and none of us can work it out. So, albeit that Alicia and Ruben are already on hold, there is one phone line. Oh, it's gone. How does she think it would work? Or is it possible, do you think, that she has just announced something entirely for reasons of so-called culture war without having any substantive notion of how it might actually be enacted as a policy? I don't know. Here's another thing as well. I always try and keep on top of stories like this. 13 men in Bolton make their first court appearance today, charged with a string of sex offences against girls aged between 14 and 17. Offences including grooming. 13 men charged with those child sex offences, more than 50. In total, it's part of an investigation into child sexual exploitation in the Northwest. Now, can you think why my inbox is not peppered with Billy Bunch of Numbers and Little Tommy Ten Names fans asking me why I'm not talking about this today? Anyone? Bueller? Why is Billy Bunch of Numbers and Little Tommy Ten Names fans not peppering my inbox with questions about why I'm not talking about the latest court case? Because I could talk about it a bit without risking contempt of court, of course. I could even read out the names of the defendants. But if I did that, you'd know why Billy Bunch of Numbers and Little Tommy Ten Names fans aren't pretending to be deeply concerned about the victims in this case. I've said it to you before, and I shall say it again. If your attitude to any crime is in any way affected by the ethnicity of the alleged culprit, then you are being racist. No matter how many people in the cabinet or the British media like to pretend otherwise. The reason why Little Tommy Ten Names fans and Billy Bunch of Numbers are not peppering my inbox with questions about why we're not talking about 13 men being charged with more than 50 child sex offences as part of an investigation into grooming and child sexual exploitation is because they're white. Full stop, QED. 11:52. Back to the other side of the culture war coin that the current government is so desperate to ignite. Transgender issues. Alicia is in Cardiff. How would Kemi's law work, Alicia?
It wouldn't. I think what she's counting on is that people will feel legitimized in sort of self-check. So,
vigilante penis police.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, hi, James.
Hello, Alicia.
It's a pleasure to talk to you. I've talked to you through the radio and talking back for so many years that it's so bizarre to talk to you. Hi.
Well, this is probably less satisfying.
It's interesting that, of course, like I felt like this was finally the time of all the times that I answered back to the radio, because I'm a non-binary person and I'm married to a transgender woman. And what surprises me of this is that very, very few people realize all of these concepts of the penis is the evil, fundamentally, is actually a blind spot of British law, because we go along with sort of patriarchal flattery of women are wonderful, women could never do bad things.
Yes.
And in British law, a woman can be convicted of sexual assault, but not of rape, because they don't have a penis. Technically, supposedly, they think.
Are you 100% sure about that? It's not an area of expertise. Are you? Okay, all right.
Because I have been the victim of child abuse from my mother.
Okay.
And there's no other way to describe that as if not rape, but that wouldn't have been the case.
I understand.
There was a case a few months ago now, Isla Bryson in Scotland.
Careful.
And Yvette Cooper.
Was that just, I don't know. I'm always nervous when people mention criminal cases or court cases that I haven't got the names and the details at my fingertips. Just give me a brief...
Very, very briefly, like, she's a transgender woman, but she transitioned after
being convicted of rape.
Yeah.
Yes.
And rightfully, people like Yvette Cooper were like, oh, she has a penis, so she needs to go in a men's prison. And all this fuss was actually done while she was already in isolation, so she wasn't affecting either women or men, which I think should be the case for rape.
Well, I fell into that position as well. I mean, for me, I can conceive of somebody... And I think people that knew her very well said they didn't believe this was true. They thought it was an attempt to evade some elements of justice. So
I think highlights an issue, a blind spot in the law. Like, you do something against other people, you shouldn't be around other people. And in that, gender doesn't come true. Like,
okay.
I think the transgender issue of Sean Fay explains perfectly how transgender issues are peppered around, but just highlight blind spots that we currently have in the systems for people in general.
Yeah, but these are the blind spots we're talking about today. I don't know that we need to reach for that example at this point, because I am chiefly interested in the question of whether there is any way on earth in which Kemi Badenoch's dreams could come true on this issue.
No, again, going back to the beginning, I think the point is legitimization of all, like, the gender critical people and all the people that, like, want to sort of look closely, and if you don't adhere perfectly to your expected gender expression, then if there's a law about it, a random person, feel entitled to.
But that seems to be the inevitable, the inevitable upshot of it is that. I don't know whether you were aware of this, but when paedophilia finally started receiving the coverage that it should obviously deserve, and various scandals began to unfold in this country, some of the great British public started throwing bricks through the windows of paediatricians, for example.
Oh my God!
It's because that is what happens when the mob is fed a little bit too much red meat. Can I ask you a question from your perspective as a non-binary person married to a transgender woman?
Yeah.
Outside of your life, how I mean, and outside of the media dedicated to whipping up a firestorm on behalf of this bankrupt government, how big a deal is it, do you think?
I'll be honest. I think we're in Cardiff, and we're extremely lucky to be part of organizations that are pro-LGBTQ, and we support them, and we're part of them. And the main ways that these lamentations manifest is through rallies. Like last year's Pride was co-opted at the front by TERFs, and there was an issue.
So that's a trans-exclusionary radical feminist, which is usually a description that the people you're talking about reject. I just need to be balanced.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But the
so
issue
they want to remove the T from LGBTQ.
Basically,
really. Yes. Okay.
The issue there is that feminism tries to sort of liberate and equate things, while from the point of view of radical feminist, the concept is, if you are against any of my ideas and I'm a woman, then you're misogynistic, which is a bit of a...
Well, I've been on the receiving end of that, but I hadn't actually managed to articulate it and say, of course it is.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue.
You must be a misogynistic.
Well,
it's a bit like, do you know, back in the day, Alicia, I remember someone at work called me homophobic because I'd made a comment about somebody in the public eye doing something awful who was gay. And I remember saying, it's not because he's gay. It might have been when Boy George chained a rent boy to the wall, actually, and got
that was kind of an issue, wasn't it?
I didn't think, I just thought that's not very nice behaviour, but that can't possibly be homophobic to say don't chain people to walls against that. But so that, you're right, there is a bleeding into the same territory that I've experienced, but I get very sensitive about it. I'm conscious of not being as invested or as experienced as you are, or when it comes to investment, the people you just described as TERFs are. So I do probably balk more under criticism on this issue than I do on any other, which is why I'm glad that we've had this conversation today, including with you, this idea of how the law would work. How would it work? Let's introduce one more call. No one really so far, Ellie in Wakefield, has got a clue how this would actually be implemented, so no pressure on you.
This would have been my biggest dilemma.
Yeah.
Yesterday even. But I've just had a light bulb moment.
Me too.
As you introduced it.
Gosh.
Why is there a question? That's my answer.
Yeah.
I was born female. I'm heterosexual. So I don't have friends,
yes,
on the transgender side. I also have PTSD, so you'll have to excuse me being nervous. Due to male violence in my past.
I'm sorry.
So I believe people are people. Let them be what they want to be as long as they're not harming anyone else. But I still have that overriding fear.
Yes.
Of being in a room with men.
Yes.
But listening to you talking earlier, it took me back to days back in the early 90s. We used to go in a local bar, that had quite a high proportion of gay people in there. There'd be drag queens and so on. And it was an absolute wonderful place. It was probably the least place you would find trouble on a night out. And we used to go to the ladies, as you do, and, we'd walk in. And there'd be a drag queen at the sink, adjusting the makeup. And we'd be washing our hands, chatting away to them, getting tips and, laughing and giggling with them. And, they were just people, just like they were a person just as I was, and then, women would walk in and they may be a bit burly and tattooed and whatnot. And I'd probably be more nervous of them than I was at the man stood next to me washing his hands in the sink. So why shouldn't we take people at face value? I could be...
I do
the
understand.
first time I had real violence was in the home with my father. I had it with an ex-boyfriend, a guy I lived with. He beat me to a pulp. He held a knife to my throat. And so, I really do panic just at the sight or the sound of aggression. I cannot handle it. But I could be killed on the street. So what difference is it when I'm stood in a public toilet surrounded hopefully by other women or other transgender people who may, if there was a creep in there. And I think as women, we would know that. We would see that someone's hanging around, someone's looking at us not quite right. There's nothing worse than women for intuition, and especially.
So hang on, I'm going to correct you for the first time. I'm going to say there's nothing better than women for intuition. Not there's nothing worse, Ellie. True.
So and we stand together in a group.
So the fear. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I may have misunderstood. I don't think I have. The fear you live with as part of your PTSD and as a consequence of your experiences has been fed and exacerbated by elements of the transgender conversation until today when you realise that it shouldn't have been. Is that what you're saying?
No, not really.
Good, I'm glad I checked.
because I want to stand with the transgender people.
Right.
And you are who you are.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. If we go cut it, oh crikey, something's more spiritual, like yin and yang.
Yeah.
There's good and bad. There's light and dark. There's male and female. My sister's probably more male than I am.
Right.
She jumps to aggression really easily.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm more passive. And there are men out there who are aggressive, but some are very passive and laid back and, let things slide. So we all have a degree of male and female within us. None of us are purely male. None of us are purely female. We're all a mix.
And we're focusing on the wrong thing. This entire confected debate focuses on the wrong thing.
We're sticking labels on people. It's like saying you can't come in here because you're black.
Do you think
Only
so?
whites are allowed.
Some people will balk at that, I think. No one's arguing for every man in the country to be able to go into every toilet in the country.
No.
But it's a discrimination. It's a different form of discrimination, but still discrimination.
It is, yeah.
Gosh.
But having said that, when the ladies were packed out in the nightclub, we used to pile in the gents.
To drive me potty. Absolutely outrageous behaviour.
Yeah, and we're all looking at this from a woman's point of view.
Yes.
Inevitably,
I think I'm very, very late for the news. So I think you've said everything you wanted to say. I hope you have. Have you?
Should live and let live and judge people as they are.
Well, and I mean, in conclusion, you've got no more idea than I have, or any other caller, or any contributor, and I haven't got any clever clogs texters telling me that, that they've got the answer to this, but I won't let them on because they're too clever for me. It does happen. By the way, I do get texts like that. Who would check? If you can't answer that question, stop banging on about whether or not women can have penises. Ellie, thank you. Thank you so much. It's 5 minutes after 12. It is 8 minutes after 12. I'll read this out as an emblem or a representation of a lot of the messages coming into the studio. An awful lot of love for Ellie, actually. Ellie, if you're still listening, I hope you are. An awful lot of love for you. Claire in Warrington says, this lady is spot on. My daughter's been saying this for such a long time. Pragmatism should be at the fore. But this is from Elena. She writes, thank you for your hour on this. Your callers have been a refreshing injection of reality into the public discussion. Often when I encounter it, all the views and points covered by your callers in the last hour are framed to be hardline, extremist or peripheral. Normalisation of these arguments is extremely important. Thank you. And she adds, some of your callers state that they don't have any transgender friends. They may now consider me one of them. Oh, lovely thing to say, Elena. 9 minutes after 12 is the time. All right, a complete change of pace now. So have you got a minute for just another little introduction to how my brain works when I'm in the studio? Sometimes my interest in a topic changes while I'm on air, not talking about that topic. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, if you said, what's going to be on the show today? You've noticed this, and I'll say X, Y, and Z. And then in the course of the first 2 hours of the programme, in the course of X and Y, I get less interested in Z. But the opposite happens as well. It's why I very rarely tell you what's coming up next, because I very rarely stick to the script. But this one, the more I think about this, the more interesting I find it. It's not, by any stretch of the imagination, fisticuffs territory. It is not controversial or provocative or difficult. So Cami Badenoch won't be remotely interested in it. We can be certain of that. But it is really interesting, and it's very much real life on the radio, as I think we used to say. Most office workers who quit their jobs during the pandemic now regret the decision. Now, this might be interesting for the government's determination to get early retirees back to work. We talked about this. We got in on this very early. We often do, don't we, together? Because we're talking about what's going on in our own lives, and then 3 months down the line, it becomes a phenomenon. It becomes a social phenomenon. But I know that a lot of people who retired during the lockdown did so for very lockdowny reasons. And although this survey perhaps delivers the findings that the government or whoever commissioned the survey might have hoped to find, there was a thing called the Great Resignation, which continued into last year. It pushed up wages, and it added to problems with recruitment and vacancies, which, of course, are going to be an awful lot to do with Brexit. I think we're just about arriving at the place in this country where most of us can say that without fear of contradiction. Suella Braverman obviously still claiming that things like the situation in Dover had absolutely nothing to do with Brexit, even as Downing Street, I think, conceded that it did, or certainly the chief executive of the Port of Dover, but what would he know? It's come from a recruitment firm, so I always caveat polling or surveys with a little bit on the provenance. We surveyed 5,000 turkeys, and they all want Christmas to be banned. That would turn into a Daily Telegraph headline saying, Tory outrage at calls for Christmas to be banned, and then you'd have to read in the story to find out it's actually a survey of turkeys in November. So they've actually got over the line. They're alive. They're not all the non-existent turkeys who would be introduced into the equation if we did abolish Christmas or Thanksgiving. So, look, I accept all of that. But you know, on we go. And we'll find out. Look, if no one rings me, then obviously the findings of the survey are bogus. So I'm going to call this phone in. I'm going to call this hour of the programme Lockdown Regrets. And I'm going to break it into two areas. You either gave up your job, changed your job or gave it up entirely, or you moved house. And you did this during lockdown because your world changed and your priorities shifted and you began to look afresh at your environment and your existence. What I want to know now is whether or not you have any regrets. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 13 minutes after 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And 71% of workers who gave up work or changed work during the lockdown now want to return to their pre-pandemic employer, according to a survey of 3,000 office staff, to which you have two responses, one of which might be chinny chin chin, but the other one is, well, why don't you then? Because there's supposed to be vacancies everywhere. And particularly, and I will have nothing but sympathy for your position if you fall into this category, particularly if you've called me in a great mood over the last 3 years to tell me about how you've moved house or changed job as a consequence of coronavirus reordering your priorities. And you are now recognising, shall we say, some regret, some misgivings, some second thoughts. The Great Resignation is a thing. Loads of people did give up work during the pandemic. Whether or not the Great Regret turns out to be a thing, only time will tell. This is the thousands of workers who began quitting in early 2021 because they were miserable about pay or working conditions over the lockdown, and they just thought, well, we'll live differently, we don't need as much money, we'll change our lifestyles. 45% moved on to better jobs. They also have regret. That's quite an interesting moment, isn't it? So you didn't retire, you moved on to a better job, but you now regret doing that. I find that quite hard to process. 35% quit for a better workplace culture or in order to work more happily from home. But many are now regretting this move as working life returns to normal and the cost of living crisis puts a strain on household budgets. I've got one mate who moved to the countryside and they've now moved back. And it was quite a big deal when they moved to the countryside as well, because he's very much an urban boy, very much a city boy, and he got well into it. He was sending me pictures of hares frolicking in the meadows and all sorts of engagement, like we talked about at the top of the show today and yesterday, engagement in nature, communing with nature. And it was beautiful and life-changing, but it became unsustainable. The school was tricky. The school was difficult. The kids starting at a new school. Partners, both still working back in London, so the commute, sort of on the fringes of Oxfordshire, is it the M4 or the M40? Up one of the four roads. And they just knocked it on the head and come back. So that would work as well. I know someone who moved to Cornwall. I haven't heard from them since. I must check up on them, actually, on Facebook later. And they were moved from the heart of London to Cornwall because they'd realised they could run their business from home and they didn't need to rent office space just off Carnaby Street. They could actually do it all from home. And everything was online and Zoom. I don't know how that's worked out. Maybe she's moved back. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. So you're in one of three categories. You either retired or changed job or moved house. You made a major lifestyle change during lockdown and you now regret it. I just want to know why. 0345 6060 973. And if you hit the numbers now, incredibly busy in the last hour. Never seen a switchboard that busy when we're talking about transgender issues on the radio, but you live and learn. If you hit the numbers now, I promise you will get through. Complete change of gear, and there is a chance no one will ring. Because this might be a made-up story designed to suit the narrative of we need to get people back to work because we've abolished freedom of movement and all the people that used to do these jobs aren't coming here anymore, even though immigration has actually gone up because of reasons. 12:17 is the time. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. It is 20 minutes after 12. We were bullied out by the bumpkins. There's a text that appears at the top of my inbox. I hadn't thought about that, perhaps, as being a reason for, what do you call it? It's not flight, urban flight. So lockdown flight to the countryside, to the green and pleasant hills, and then finding out that it's, people are different there. Life is very different there. And then you move back again. I don't know. I've got a foot in both camps. I grew up in semi-rural Worcestershire, but I've lived in London for 31 years. Maybe it would be a massive culture shock. And you didn't really realise that when you were moving. Anyway, 3 big lifestyle changes. You either retired because of lockdown. You thought, I'm coming out early. I don't need as much money as I thought I did. You changed jobs because of lockdown. You thought, I don't need to do this. It doesn't have to be this way. Or you moved house because of lockdown. You thought, and now you've got regrets. I may, glancing at the screen, have to open it up also to people, to quote the great Robbie Williams, who have no regrets. Because so far, despite having been commissioned by that well-known recruiter, Robert... Hang on, I've lost the story now. Guy's going well, isn't it? Robert Walters. I'm not being inundated with people keen to share their lockdown regrets. Lewis, however, is in Sutton. Lewis, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Good afternoon.
Hello.
So basically, I actually had no regrets until about a week ago.
Oh.
So I used to work in an office, and I used to work in facilities management.
Yes.
And because of the pandemic, I left simply because I didn't find it very comfortable working from home. I was happy with commuting. I was happy getting up and going to work and having a routine.
Yes.
So I left the job, and I now work for a very large broadband provider.
So you just didn't want to work from home? I mean,
No.
do you hate your family?
No, not at all. It's just literally me and my partner at home.
Okay, do you hate her?
She works for the NHS, so
Fine. She was out and about. So you were actually rattling around an empty building and climbing the walls then a bit?
Exactly that. I was also finding it very difficult to try and focus on my job whilst being at home, because I was sort of either doing the washing up or, doing this, that, and the other and whatever else. So,
doing the washing up. I've never heard it called that before.
So as I say, I didn't actually have any regrets until a couple of days ago. I left my job in facilities management in an office. I've been now with a very large broadband provider, and I've been there for about 2 years since I've left this other job.
Right.
And then a couple of days ago, I get a phone call from the operations manager of the company I used to work for, basically pleading with me to come back.
Well. I bet that made you feel good, though.
Absolutely, yeah. It did make me feel fantastic. However, I'm very happy and quite comfortable where I am now, obviously doing my, with the broadband provider.
Yeah.
But
you never do anything, do you? You just sit in your van all day reading the paper while we're sitting at home going, where the hell's the broadband bloke? He said he'd be here at 2 o'clock.
You must be joking. But equally, what they're now offering me and sort of putting on paper, it's a hell of a lot better than what it was when I was there previously.
Well. It's interesting, isn't it? They don't know what they've got till it's gone.
Exactly. It wasn't necessarily a regret in terms of I've made the mistake. It's they made the mistake, and obviously now what they're offering me, I'm thinking, actually, have I made the right mistake? And I'm sort of now I'm in an R-in about what I should do.
How much? I mean, broadly speaking, or broadbandly speaking, how much more is on? I mean, percentage terms, how much more is on the table than was there before?
Well, excuse me. I mean, my maths is absolutely terrible.
Yeah, me too. Don't worry about it. But enough to really notice at the end of every month.
Absolutely. So, I'm happy to tell you a number if you want to.
No, I don't think you need to do that. It's not. It's a bit. I don't. It'd be indiscreet of me. I'm more than happy with enough to make a difference at the end of every month.
Absolutely.
What is it you like most about the new job?
The freedom, being out and about. You don't have people constantly walking over to your desk and saying, "Is this done? Is that done?
Yeah.
Can we get this chased up?" The client's not happy with this, that, and the other.
So you're essentially more like a self-employed person, even though you're not self-employed. You have your list at the beginning of every day, and you just crack on with it uninterrupted.
Exactly that. Every morning we get our daily schedule sent through to our work phones, and that's my list of customers for the day. Sometimes more are added, sometimes some are taken away.
What are you going to do?
How busy you are, but
what are you going to do?
Honestly, at the moment, I'm more sort of swayed to go back to the office.
Right. Just for the dosh.
No, not necessarily, no, because they're also offering me to pay for my electrical qualification.
Ooh, that's good. What does your partner think?
She thinks I should take it.
Does she? So she hasn't noticed a massive change in you as a consequence of doing the new job then?
No, but equally I'm happy with my new job because I have freedom.
No, mate. Swings and roundabouts.
Quite good.
Swings and roundabouts. I mean, I can't put you down as proof that this survey is correct, though, because you don't really have any regrets about leaving. They've just come back with a better offer, an offer he couldn't refuse. So it's interesting, though. All human life is here. James asks, how about you, mate? Would you like to be broadcasting from home again? Is there any benefit to being back in the studio? I'll answer that before I go home today. I promise. Stuart's in Beaconsfield. Stuart, what do you reckon?
Hello. There's nothing I really regret apart from...
This is the rubbishest topic ever.
No, not really.
Well, it is. There's two callers in now. We're 100% record, and neither of you have got any regrets about anything.
At the time,
yes,
there was regret, but it's kind of worked its way through. So right at the beginning of lockdown, I moved from working for a local authority, I won't name it, managing a park in outdoor kind of work, green spaces, and then moved with the pretense with my partner that I would move to somewhere else with a job to go to.
Yes.
And again, not naming any names, but because of said pandemic starting, everyone lost their jobs 5 days later.
Oh no.
So yes, right at the beginning, in the middle, at the beginning of the pandemic, I'm then thrown. Luckily, my partner's lovely and everything's kind of worked out. But at the time, incredibly stressful, and I was really quite dependent on him to get by. And that's not kind of something you want in the beginning of a relationship.
No.
And bounced around jobs for several months. I worked on a pig farm. It's a bit of a difference. And
Did
now,
you really?
a bit like your previous caller, I work as a driver now. So, and I kind of find it one of the better jobs. I wouldn't know what.
Would you go back to the original job? Would you go back to park management?
No, I don't think I would.
Okay.
It's kind of.
I'm delighted for you, and it is very interesting. But it's the polar opposite of the reasons I gave you for calling in.
Oh. Have I misunderstood?
No, you haven't misunderstood at all. I think you've actually answered the question rather well by accident. We're not buying this research as it goes.
Okay.
By the judgment of my switchboard, the regrets are very thin on the ground, whereas changes that have been thrust upon you have turned out to be quite welcome and pleasant. There's so many things, Stuart, that we don't do unless we have to, and then we look back on and think, actually, do you know what? I wouldn't have done that voluntarily, but I'm so glad that I did. And I think you're very much in that category.
I would agree.
I like it. Take care. We'll talk about the pig farm another time. 28 minutes after 12 is the time. Have we got? I'm just going to have a quick word with the producer. Just talk among yourselves for a moment. Does anybody have any regrets about anything they did during lockdown? Have we got anyone yet? Apart from the fellow who got chased out of the countryside by the bumpkins? Any regrets? This topic is brought to you by Robbie Williams. No, two. We've got two. Gosh. Anyway, I don't have any. No, I said I'd answer this question. How about you? Would you like to? No, I must have told you this. I started. I had a bit of a. Towards the end of broadcasting from my shed, everything started going a bit weird. So I didn't really have screens in front of me. All I had in front of me was my laptop. In here, I've got TVs, switchboard, feed, Twitter, all of that. I've got loads of things. It was quite nice not to have to look at Keith's ugly mug every day. That was not entirely but all I could. So if I started talking at 12:15, like I did 14 minutes ago, right? It was possible, and it happened on 2, maybe 3 occasions. It was possible that I wouldn't know that you couldn't hear me until 12:30. So the feed would freeze, and my laptop I wouldn't get the message that I had gone off air. Everything would freeze. So I've got 10 phone lines in front of me, and there's 10 people waiting to talk to me. Now I'm waiting for someone back in London to type, back in the studio to type, up next it's Kenny in Glasgow. That's true, by the way. Up next it's Kenny in Glasgow. But I can see that. No one needs... So that would freeze and I wouldn't know. But then on occasion, the signal went down as well. And so I would spend 4 or 5 minutes, I think was the longest ever, talking. And then I'd get to the break And my mobile would ring and they'd say, we're down, we're off. We've been playing the emergency tape for the last 5 minutes. Now, once that happens, it plays with your mind. You start thinking all the time that no one can hear you, which is a weird position for a radio presenter to be in. It's a little bit like the Twilight Zone. And then, of course, there was the added confusion of wondering whether my wife was in on it. So that in order to get me out of the house for 3 hours every morning, Mrs. O'Brien would hand me my cup of coffee, pat me on the bottom and send me to the shed at the bottom of the garden and say, off you go, darling, go and do your radio show. We'll see you in 3 hours. And midway through a segment, particularly if I was waiting for a call, I'd be sitting here thinking, is anyone actually listening to this? I mean, anyone. I don't mean like the audience has gone off a cliff. I mean, I'm not actually on the radio. I'm just sitting in a shed in Chiswick, talking into the ether, and nobody is listening. Yeah, it's not a very healthy thought to have when you're live on the radio. So to answer your question, James, no regrets at all. Not even a little one. Not even a well, I like the lie-in. The extra hour in bed was quite nice, and I could do it when I had COVID, which if I'd been coming into work, I couldn't have done that. So apart from that, no. 12:31 is the time. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines. It is 12:35 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we will return to the question of, well, it's supposed to be a phone-in about people who regret big decisions that were made during the lockdown, but my switchboard is now full of people who phone me to tell me why they don't regret big decisions made during lockdown. Except possibly John, who made a decision and then regretted it, but now doesn't. We'll get to him after we've spoken to Kenny in Glasgow, but we won't be speaking to anybody until we've heard from Simon Marks about events in New York yesterday, where, by complete coincidence, on International Carrot Day, Donald Trump found himself in front of a judge. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, James. I'm not going to take that up either today, as I did yesterday. So Donald Trump is back at Mar-a-Lago, and he's absolutely raging about the events of yesterday. He's taken to his Truth Social media platform this morning to say Republicans in Congress should defund the Department of Justice and FBI until they come to their senses. The Democrats have totally weaponized law enforcement in our country and are viciously using the abuse of power to interfere with our already under siege elections. All of that, of course, part of his reaction to the 34-count indictment levelled against him, accusing him of falsifying business records relating to the $130,000 hush money payment he made to Stormy Daniels, to a similar size payment that he made to another woman, a former Playboy model, and to a $30,000 payment that he made to a doorman at Trump Tower who falsely claimed to have evidence that Donald Trump had a love child outside his marriage. The raging continued in front of Donald Trump's supporters in Mar-a-Lago last night, where he insisted he had done nothing wrong.
The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it.
And just hours after the judge in the case warned him to moderate some of his comments about the judge, his wife, his family, and also about Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, once again, former President Trump, turned his fire on the prosecutor who is coming after him.
The criminal is the district attorney because he illegally leaked massive amounts of grand jury information, for which he should be prosecuted, or at a minimum, he should resign.
Now, that's a risky strategy that Donald Trump is taking there, and again on social media today, because it is possible that the prosecutor could stack a few more criminal charges up on the pile if he senses that Donald Trump is trying to interfere with the proceedings of justice that are underway in New York. Those proceedings are, as we surmised yesterday on the programme, going to move very slowly. The next hearing in this case is now not due to take place until December the 4th. So imagine how long it's going to be before Donald Trump actually gets his day in court to try and furnish evidence to suggest that he is not guilty of the charges that Alvin Bragg has brought against him.
contrast between his demeanour in front of the adoring crowds at Mar-a-Lago and his demeanour in court, I think it's fair to say.
Well, I think it was all deliberate, wasn't it? I mean, his demeanour in court was absolutely stony-faced. I mean, certainly we had been led to believe that Donald Trump intended to speak at the courtroom, at the courthouse, rather, and there was a camera positioned in the corridor outside the courtroom where we thought Donald Trump might make a few comments. Now, it's possible that the district attorney, during the processing that took place, said under no circumstances is Donald Trump going to do that here today. But in the end, he preserved his fire until he got back to Mar-a-Lago, albeit engaging in a bit of social media outrage on the way. But, I mean, I think the demeanour at the court, which was absolutely stony-faced and sort of grimly focused on the proceedings that were taking place for fully an hour inside that courtroom, were deliberate strategy by Trump. I think he wanted to send a message to his supporters and to the wider public that he feels this is an entirely unjust process, that it is completely politically motivated, and that he is the victim of prosecutorial misconduct. And James, it is worth just dwelling on the gamble that the district attorney is taking in this case. Because if you look at the substance of the charges that Donald Trump is facing, this business of falsifying business records is normally charged as a misdemeanor. You get a rap over the knuckles, a small fine, you get told not to do it again. He's raised this to the level of a felony, which carries up to 4 years in jail if Trump were to be convicted on all charges. But in order to attain the felonious nature of this conduct, the district attorney has to prove that it was part of a plan to cover up another crime. And he says that the conspiracy was trying to defraud the American public in 2016 and make sure that they didn't know that Donald Trump had had extramarital affairs in the dying days of the 2016 presidential election. But in the indictment, and indeed at his press conference yesterday, Alvin Bragg was unable to identify specifically which laws he says Donald Trump was conspiring to break. And that's a potential problem. That may be the Achilles heel that Trump's defense attorneys go after in their effort to get these charges thrown out.
Yes, so, I mean, all to play for. Watch this space. Nothing massively unexpected unfolding yesterday, and nobody's position, presumably, on Donald Trump has shifted one iota in the last 24 hours.
Well, you say that, but there was evidence in the Reuters Ipsos poll that was published on Monday that Donald Trump's support in the race for the Republican Party's presidential nomination is actually growing. So he now has a 29 percentage point lead over his second-placed rival, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Now, Governor DeSantis has not yet declared himself a candidate for the presidency, but I think everybody assumes that he's going to. 29% point lead over DeSantis at a time when a majority of Republican voters told the same poll that they believe that Trump made hush money payments to Stormy Daniels in order to try and impact the outcome of the 2016 election. So they've baked that into their thinking.
So they think he's guilty of the felony.
They think he did it.
But his lead
is growing.
This is the shooting someone on Fifth Avenue moment, isn't it, really?
Absolutely.
A quick test, Simon. I know you're working very hard at the moment, so a little light relief. Can you name the candidate for the American presidency who ran from jail, the federal penitentiary in Atlanta in 1920?
I thought you were going to ask me a different question. I thought you were going to ask me about the candidate who ran his campaign from his front porch. I can't name that.
Nor could I. I just read it today. Eugene Debs.
Eugene Debs. Okay,
Eugene
yes,
Debs. Yeah, of course.
My son should be here. He could.
He would have got that. Jailed for speaking out against the draft during World War I and ran as a socialist contender in 1920. You live and learn. And we
Very
always.
Good. You know about the one who ran his campaign from his front porch?
No.
Benjamin Henry Harrison in the late 1800s. He decided he wasn't going to go on the road. The road was going to come to him.
How did it work out for him?
I think it was all right.
Simon Marks, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. Simon will no doubt be keeping us abreast of all of these developments as they unfold. But as he reminded us there, they unfold at glacial pace now after yesterday's. Is it an arraignment? Is that the correct term? I think it is. Apologies if it isn't. Kenny's in Glasgow. He's probably forgotten why he rang in. Let me guess, Kenny, no regrets at all about decisions you made during the pandemic.
You're absolutely right, James. I made a couple of big decisions, and I'm sorry to go against the data that's being presented in front of us, but I changed job, I moved house, and both have worked out to be great moves.
And they were decisions born at least in part of the lockdown experience.
Well, what was interesting for me was that it wasn't the lockdown experience that made me want to change job, but It was the pandemic. So when furlough first became an option, our company put us on furlough straight away.
Yeah.
And it really annoyed me because we were making more money, more profit than we'd ever been making before. Now, of course, we didn't know what was coming. This was very early in the pandemic, so maybe some could argue that it was an attempt to defend, but what seemed to me was just taking government money to make sure that you were covering costs, and it really changed my viewpoint of the company I was working for, and I immediately started to look for work elsewhere.
Yeah, I get it. It's I don't know. You can sort of reprioritise slightly then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did work and I do work in the healthcare sector. So when you see that kind of, what seemed to me like profiteering happening, it really went against why I work in this area. Yeah, I work for a private company, but I still do care about the patient. So to see that happening and government money being taken for that reason, it just didn't sit well with me at all.
And yet again, another contributor who is ringing in with the precise opposite position to the one that this poll suggests. I don't know what this means, but I'm learning stuff I wasn't expecting to learn. It is 12:49 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. John's in Hillingdon. John, what would you like to say?
2020, absolute roller coaster of regret. And, So imagine this. So I'd done 19 years in the police, and I decided at the end of, the year before, I've had enough. I need to find a different career. I can't stick this anymore.
Okay.
So I train up to be a driving instructor. Something I love teaching the kids when they come out of Hendon, and I love the driving. So I thought I'd combine the two. Great job. So I was really getting up for this. Got all through my qualifications. Then suddenly this thing in China starts bubbling up about some virus, and thought, that's a bit dodgy, isn't it? So I hand in my notice, and my resignation date is March 2020. So I literally left a 19-year career into this new sort of dream job that I thought was going well, self-employed, looking forward to it, to suddenly not be able to teach and not be able to earn any money.
Oh, wow. That's bad luck, though, rather than a big mistake, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you kind of get to this state because we had lockdowns, didn't we? And in London we had Tier 4 as well. So it became, this is bad luck, but how long is it going to go on for? And I'd never claimed dole money in my life, but that was the only thing that I could claim because I had no furlough, because I had no tax returns to produce. So I was literally I had to put the pause on my mortgage so that I could, get by. And then you start up again in July, and then suddenly Tier 4 comes back in. And then, of course, because you've got to update all your training and stuff, and I couldn't update it because there was no updating going on because everything was, oh, my God. So, yeah, I massively thought, why did I not just stick it out a bit longer before it started?
Just to hang in it. But now that the sea has come back in again...
Yeah, now the sea has come back in again. Absolutely no regrets. Absolutely love my job.
Do you?
And can actually look back at it and with a bit of a laugh and think, phew. But yeah, there were big, long moments painting and decorating and trying to do anything that I could just to keep myself occupied. Whilst I thought, am I ever actually going to be able to do this job? Yeah.
I know. Well, at least the house is nice.
Yeah, well, some of it, yeah.
I like it. And you genuinely prefer being a driving instructor to your last few years in the force?
Oh, my God, yes. I mean, the money is not quite so good, but the appreciation, and you're just doing something positive, changing people's lives. You get thanked for what you do. It's just it's beautiful.
Yeah,
honestly.
I can imagine it. And you see the results as well. I remember my driving instructor, I was quite a late learner, Noel, over in Islington. I got quite emotional when I passed first, especially because when we first started, I was so rubbish. And then passed first time, actually, since you asked. It was a lovely moment. I could see where the satisfaction comes from in that, in ways that would be difficult or different in the old job. 12:52 is the time. Vicky says, I regret quitting my social work masters during COVID. The lack of learning in an environment with experienced social workers really impacted on me and my mental health, especially during my second placement in a child protection team, where I was trying to understand everything I was experiencing and trying to learn on my own from my bedroom. I was told I wasn't resilient enough, so that was that. Yeah, I think there must have been an awful lot of people who got, if you were on a course of some sort that would have involved face-to-face teaching or placement or experience. It's not so much regretting the decision, I don't want to put words into your mouth, Vicky, as being a victim of awful circumstances. That I'm not sure things could have unfolded differently. It gets overlooked a lot. Marie's in Brixton. I nearly said Marie's in Brexit. I've got it on the brain. Marie, what would you like to say?
Yeah, my regret, it's half of a regret. So in the middle of lockdown, I left the job, I got made redundant and I got a bit of money. And I thought this was like the end of 2019.
Yes.
So I thought, I'm going to take a few months off. I've got a bit of money. I'm going to just relax and then start looking for work. Lockdown hit a month later. And then it was like, oh, I can't go anywhere. What do I do? Oh, I'm not working. Okay, I've got a bit of money. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to renovate my flat. But then I didn't. But I realised that it, I sort of agreed that it was going to be the whole flat.
Right.
So I couldn't basically stay there. So it turned into I'm going to have to move out and stay with somebody in the middle of lockdown and not working and not living in my own property. Yeah. So it started to turn into I don't think this is a really good idea.
Was it just because you were bored?
Well, yeah, because I wasn't working at the time.
Right.
And I thought, well, it's the middle of lockdown. It wasn't lockdown when I decided to do the flat. And I thought. But then when I sort of signed on the dotted line in the middle of lockdown, I realised this is probably the best time to do it anyway.
Yeah, maybe.
If I was working full time, I don't think I'll be able to have the time to sit somewhere and work in working from home while there's building.
And now you're living in your dream home. Was it the right thing to do?
Yes, I was saying I think that the but was. I think the money that I had, maybe I should have put it towards the mortgage a bit more, but then obviously I've made money on the property because now I've had it renovated. But all the money that I had is gone now, completely gone.
Well, it's time to start again.
Well, exactly. I don't think I'll ever have that kind of money.
I like that.
Again.
We should maybe have thought about the sort of rush of blood to the head decisions rather than the slightly more carefully considered ones that people have regretted. I love that. Thank you, Marie. I'm sure the place is glorious now. You need never leave it again. I'm going to squeeze in one of these.
Woke Watch.
Britain's Eurovision entrant is a left-wing activist who hates Boris Johnson and said he did not deserve an ICU bed as he fought for his life. The Telegraph can reveal. So May Muller, who will perform her track I Wrote a Song in the Eurovision Song Contest next month, is now under attack from the anti-woke forces of this country for tweeting some mean things about Boris Johnson in April of 2020. Is anyone going to tell the Daily Telegraph that Boris Johnson was actually hounded out of office by most of the current cabinet and a huge proportion of Conservative MPs? So I don't know if criticising Boris Johnson makes you a left-wing activist who is not fit to represent the United Kingdom in the Eurovision Song Contest. What the hell is Rishi Sunak? Not to mention Jeremy Hunt. 30p Lee. Oh dear, it's like night following day, isn't it? Or, I don't know, sort of Harpic following an evacuation of your bowels. Up pops 30p Lee Anderson, who's talked about the singer's vile left-wing slurs. At which point you think, crikey, vile left-wing slurs, what's she said? And what she said was, unpopular opinion, but I do not feel sorry for Boris Johnson. How is that left-wing? How is thinking that Boris Johnson is a bit of a menace, left-wing? 30p Lee, because it was your cabinet that got rid of him. Mate, it was a very personal decision that Boris Johnson was not worthy of there. So, but anyway, according to 30p Lee Anderson, she is a vile purveyor of vile left-wing slurs, and it's all the BBC's fault for choosing her to represent the UK. How much do you have to hate this country in order to sabotage our Eurovision Song Contest entry? That's what I want to know from 30p Lee. Why do you hate this country so much? Why don't you want us to win the Eurovision Song Contest, 30p Lee? Is it because you want to do it yourself? Let me sing the theme tune. Is it because you want to do it yourself with your little ukulele? I do not know, but that is the end of today's Woke Watch. Except to say good luck to May Muller. It's a cracking song. I think we're in with quite a good chance. What's he going to do when he finds out that Sam Ryder is a vegan? Last year's entrant in the Eurovision Song Contest he's a lovely bloke. I've had the pleasure of meeting him on a couple of occasions. He's an actual vegan.
Are we absolutely certain he's not an angel that's fallen to earth?
He's a beautiful man.
He's a gorgeous person.
Beautiful. Gave me a big hug. I had to introduce him onto the stage.
I only got a smile.
Had to introduce him onto the stage. I did it. I was auditioning for a job on one of the other radio stations at one of our charity events. And I'd say, and now, welcome to the stage, ladies and... Anyway, that's enough for me.
But you loved that, didn't you?
You did love that. I loved it, yeah. More than enough from me for today. If you missed any of it, you can listen back on Global Player, where you can rewind the good bits to listen to them again or enjoy the whole show podcast. All of LBC's shows are there, as well as the video clips now from LBC and other global stations. So do rewind live radio on Global Player. Download for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, Tom Swarbrick. But now, as you've gathered, hey, I'm early. I've got 11 more seconds. I'll give them to you, shall I?
Well, shall I tell you a nice thing?
Please.
One of my best friends in the world, Pauline McAdam, has been asked to write, in fact, she's done it, she's written it, to write a poem, that will kick off the fortnight's Festival of Music, Song and Dance and Joy in Liverpool ahead of the Eurovision.
Oh, how cool.
Isn't that lovely?
That's absolutely glorious.
Yeah.
Is it any good?
It is good. I'm not going to reveal it.
For that.
It's actually rather beautiful. It made me cry.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah. It blends the characteristics that we love in Liverpool and the bravery and fortitude that we've seen in Ukraine.
Oh, wow. Perfect city to
Really lovely. Really lovely. Anyway, you can all hear it on the day. Thanks, James 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 Day.